Good morning. About 400 BC, a fellow named Democritus had an idea. He said, if you take anything that exists in the world, anything that is solid, and you start breaking it down, and you break it down, and then you break it down again, you break it down again, eventually you will get to the point where you have something that he called, anybody? An atom. 400 years before the birth of Jesus, and he's talking about atoms. It's incredible. And Democritus's idea of the atom went right up to the atomic age, where we started learning more things about atoms. But his idea, and the basic idea of the atom that went from him to Newton at least, was that the atom was the basic building block of the universe. And if you sort of went down the Russian nesting dolls of existence, it was the last one where nothing else was in it. You couldn't break an atom down anymore. That was like the hard kernel of existence, and therefore the universe was atoms, these little balls that might clump together to form something or someone, but once you got down to the atom, you couldn't go any further. This kind of atomic view of existence continued on beyond just physical existence. It affected how we saw humanity. We began to see humanity, if you broke humanity down and down and down, eventually what you get to is the one human. Sort of like Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, spread eagle and representing all of humanity. It would affect how we saw psychology, and the beginnings of the psychoanalytic movement. Freud and his followers would basically say that you, with the help of a good psychoanalyst, could discover yourself. You could understand yourself, but no one else could understand you, and you could not understand anyone else. It really was like every person, every man, every woman was an island, an atom. This atomic view of the universe and existence and being sometimes is referred to as sort of like the billiard ball theory. Like everything is made up of billiard balls, and billiard balls are discrete, and they knock into each other, and they can clump together, and they can push and move each other, but each one is its own thing, and there's no melding of billiard balls. With the atomic age and the electron microscope and further science, this idea of the atom fell apart pretty quickly, because we then began to learn that atoms were not the smallest thing in the universe, the one thing that you couldn't break down any further. In fact, atoms are made up of particles, protons, neutrons, and electrons. And then you can take those particles and you can break them down. And then you can take those particles and you can break them down. And you can take those particles and break them down. And the whole billiard ball theory just completely melted away with quantum mechanics, where quantum particles do not function like billiard balls at all. A quantum particle can travel between point A to point B without traveling any of the points in between. A quantum particle can be in multiple places at the same time. Two quantum particles can be in the same place at the same time. Two quantum particles separated by an infinite number of light years can still have a relationship and an impact on each other. In fact, quantum theory would eventually say that while we used to see the universe as a series of things that may or may not have relationships. Quantum theory would now say that the universe is composed of relationships that happen to have things attached to them. We can see this in other ways. I remember, I think it was 8th grade, we studied frogs. How did I study a frog in 8th grade? What did we do to the frog? Yeah, we killed the frog. Or somebody killed the frog. I think it came to us dead and stinking of formaldehyde. And then we pinned it to a board, and then we cut it open, and its intestines went over here, and its lungs went over here, and its liver went over here. We broke it down into its constituent parts, and that's helpful, especially if you're in a 8th grade biology class and you're trying to figure out how the body works. But we can also take that frog and put it into its environment, fully alive, and see how it interacts with the rest of its environment to learn more things than just where its liver is and where its heart is. And then we can know, if we take that frog and all its frog buddies out of that environment, that it will totally turn that environment upside down, because that frog eats things that will then multiply and multiply because there's nothing to eat it, and then there are things that eat it. We start to see that things are connected. Psychology starts looking at humanity not just as individuals, but as collectives. Together, I have a way of thinking, but so does my family, and so does my larger family, and so does my tribe, and so does my church, and so does my community. I'm not just an island, but I am a part of several wholes, and I affect and am affected by those relationships. If you get bored this holiday weekend, I suggest that you Google slime mold. Slime mold, not just slime, it's got to be the mold with it. Scientists will take slime mold, which is basically a plant. I mean, it's a non-sentient, it's no brain. They would put it at one end of a maze, like the old-fashioned maze that you would do with your pencil, your crayon in a coloring book or something like that. They would put it at one end of a maze, and then they would put some food at the other end of the maze. And the slime mold, if you Google this, if you YouTube this, you can watch the slime mold move, and it solves the maze and gets to the other end and eats the food. Then they took it a step further, and they took a map of Tokyo and noted the places in Tokyo where the population was more dense than others. And they made a little map, and they put bits of this food over those places where the population was of higher density. And then they dropped a glob of slime mold right in the middle, and the slime mold fanned out over this map, and it started consuming food here, here, and here, and then it starts forming little tendrils that go from this piece of food to that piece of food to that piece of food. And some of the tendrils were not very efficient, and so they died away. And some of those tendrils were very efficient, and they grew more and more robust. And then they took that sort of model that the slime mold had made, and they laid it over top of the map of the Tokyo Underground. And it had an uncanny resemblance to the Tokyo subway. And the places that it diverged from what the engineers did with the Tokyo subway, the slime mold actually had the more efficient route. Like the slime mold did better than the engineers. Life has a way of bringing about patterns and networks. And we can see it with slime mold, and you should look it up. But we can also see it in Mr. Liga's beehives that are, little tiny communities that have different bees that perform different functions. Mr. Liga, can you have a hive of just drone bees? No, you need worker bees, and you need a queen bee, and you need bees that are going to collect food, and bees that are going to guard, and bees that are going to take care of the nursery, and bees that are going to be undertakers. You need all of those to have a healthy community. We see it when we watch the geese fly south in the winter and fly north in the spring. We see it with butterflies that travel thousands of miles from one continent to another. We see it with the human brain. The fundamental building block of existence seems to be relationship. And I've been talking about science up to now, which I know probably seems odd for a sermon on Memorial Day weekend. But for us who are Christians, who understand God as one and God as Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit, we who see God as a communion of love, God as a relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the idea that relationship is fundamental to existence should not be a new one. Paul, in the first chapter of Romans, says to the pagans of Rome, there's no excuse not to see God. You only have to look at the creation that God has made, and you can see God around us. And if we look at the creation around us and we see relationship everywhere, then we should understand that the Creator is also relationship. It's what John says in his first epistle. God is love. God is a relationship of love, Father, Son, and Spirit. For God, relationship is central. Love is central. And the love and the grace and the mercy and the forgiveness and the justice and the peace and the beauty and the joy that emanates out of that communion of love is what our God is all about. Today is Trinity Sunday. It happens every year, the Sunday after Pentecost, when we remind ourselves who and what our God is, that our God is one and our God is three. Our God is one and our God is a communion of love. And it is interesting that in almost every modern book on the Trinity by Christian theologians, if there was one that was written in the last 10, 15, 20 years, it almost always goes back at some point to quantum mechanics, to say that this is the world that God made, and it should not surprise us that this is the way that God is. And so that is interesting. I hope it's inspiring. I hope it's lovely. I hope it gives you something to think about. But there is one more step. Because we are told that we are specifically made in God's image. We are creatures made in God's image. We are creatures made in the image of God who is one and an image of God who is three in a communion of love. And that means that each one of us and each of the 8 billion people on planet Earth are made in God's image. We are each made in God's image. It is not something we have to earn or deserve or be good for. The best person on planet Earth, the worst person on planet Earth, are every one of us created in God's image. And we deserve a certain amount of honor and grace and mercy and forgiveness just because of that fact, just because of who we are and whose image we bear. But because our God is a communion of love, there are aspects of the divine image that we cannot reflect on our own. We can only reflect them when we come together. And that does not just happen. That takes intention. That takes a willingness to do it. That takes a willingness to come together with other people and a willingness to make our gathering together, our family, our community, our church, our nation, our world, to reflect the love, the grace, the mercy, the forgiveness, the justice, the peace, the joy of God. So how are we doing as humanity? How are we doing on reflecting the image of God? Pretty great. Now, friends, in some ways, I think the slime mold has us beat. But it doesn't have to. The Trinity is not just who God is and what God is. It is not just an interesting set of theological presuppositions about God. It is an ethical vocation that is laid on our lives. As Christians, we, each of us, reflect the image of God, and we carry that image wherever we go. And as Christians, we come together and should, on purpose, seek to form communities of love, grace, mercy, peace, justice, and joy. We intentionally have to do that, and our vocation is to intentionally do that in a world that is going in the exact opposite direction. Slime mold doesn't cause war. Slime mold doesn't hate. Slime mold doesn't judge. But we have to constantly fight against it. And we do. This is a community of love. When St. Mark's gathers, 99.9% of the time, we are a community of love and grace and mercy and peace and joy, and that's wonderful. And the world needs more of what we have, because it's not what we have, it's what God has in us. The Trinity is our vocation to share the love of God, really share it in our homes, in our families, in our churches, in our communities, in our nation, and in our world. Amen.